Welcome to the Rational Nationalist. Why do people vote for villains? And did history's villains start out evil, or did the same passion that inspired them to lead also drive them to commit their atrocities? What is it about these people that inspires at least some of us to follow them? People mistake emotions with strength and the courage to spout anything, even absolute nonsense, as courage in general, and both of these are admirable traits in a leader. That person yelling on the street corner is passionate, damn it. Passionate about what we can't say, but I'll be a monkey's uncle if that passion isn't infectious. It's no secret we vote for villains. Half the country would say the last election is proof of that, and the other half would say that the previous election is proof, or that the previous election is stolen, whatever. A lot of people still voted the wrong way in both cases, is my point. A lot of work has been done on why sociopaths and psychopaths come to power on the supply end, and a lot of that's relatively self-explanatory. Villains come to power because they are villains willing to do whatever it takes, including lie, cheat, and kill, to take power. Our podcast today focuses on the demand side. Why do normal people, or baseline humans for more precise terminology, willingly work to empower these villains? To be clear, I'm not talking about the Nazis. We have talked a lot, and a lot of other people have talked a lot, about why people become radicalized, join cults, embrace these extreme ideologies, and so forth. And we all know why these people empower villains. Because they are true believers who've been brainwashed. Again, the term glosses over much more complex psychological processes, but serves the purpose here. If you want to hear about that, check out our past podcasts on the topic, any of the multiple books on the topic. For example, Becoming Evil, How Ordinary People Commit Genocide, I believe provided a lot of my own background reading on the topic, or pretty much any History Channel show not about aliens. At least a few years ago, they were almost all about Nazis. Instead, what this episode is about is the paradox of passion. How the same drives and impulses that motivate us to solve society's problems simultaneously cloud our ability to think clearly and do so in a strategic manner. In other words, people don't act until they're upset enough about an issue to do so, but the more upset they become, the more clouded their thinking. Let's start with an unrelated or minimally related, tangentially related, some degree of relatedness theory, and then we'll apply it in the case of political leadership or leadership in general. And then we can debate what degree of relatedness it has or the semantics of its relatedness if that's still our goal. I'm going to refer to this as optimal arousal theory, but a brief search through the literature also sees it referred to as the Yerkes-Dodson law, which appears to be pretty much synonymous. Still, I'll refer to it as optimal arousal theory because that's what serves the generalizable purposes here. Anyway, this theory is another one that's pretty much common sense. For any given activity, there's an amount of physiological arousal that optimizes performance. In other words, a certain amount of amped up you want to be. For example, if you're driving, you don't want to be asleep at the wheel, but you probably also don't want to be so angry, pissed, and coked up that you're driving through a school zone at 100 miles an hour. There is a middle ground to most things. This level also varies from activity to activity. Chugging energy drinks, screaming, and slapping each other in the face might make sense before a football game, but probably not before a grad school exam. Unless it's graded on a curve, then you might want to try to scare or distract everybody else in the room enough to gain an edge on the curve. Anyway, this brings us back to our optimal arousal level for the political class, or for leaders in general. Now, we want our political class, by which I mean our politicians, activists, journalists, bureaucrats, and pretty much anyone else involved in the political process, to care. Anyone who's ever dealt with an apathetic bureaucrat can tell you that. There are very few things more frustrating than having a problem that everyone acknowledges is true, but is too lazy to fix. Apathy itself can be a societal issue, and in fact, it could be argued that political apathy among the good people in this country, in this case, I'm referring to normies willing to compromise in the center rather than cater to the whims of extremists, and that apathy among these people is a big part of why extremists run the show in modern day America. Within the political class, however, apathy becomes a self-solving problem because the political class is a self-selected group. The people who are apathetic don't join the political class to begin with, they stay on the sidelines. The only way for an apathetic person to get drawn in is if they're like a hereditary king or something, and I'll let you look up on your own what happens when a ruler is not particularly interested in ruling society. In today's society, the political class also selects for proportionality. In other words, the more people care, the more they get involved. Now, does that make them villains per se? No. But the point is that a lot of times people vote for villains because the villains are the only ones who care enough to run in the first place. But for now, we'll just talk a little about why this caring about things makes these people villains, because I feel like that needs a little bit of groundwork here. And naturally, the answer is our favorite punching bag, emotions, which are dumb and should be hated. Hopefully by now you've kind of caught on that I understand the full story is much more complex than that, but for now let's just agree that emotions do cause their fair share of problems. Or if you disagree, bear with me. We've already established that there's a direct correlation between how much somebody cares and how involved they are in the political process. Now quick, think about something you care about deeply. How objective are you when it comes to evaluating issues involving them? We all know the fan who thinks every call is a conspiracy against his team, or that they're going to turn around their 0-12 start to win the championship. The point is that it's possible to care too much. I don't think I have to spell out for you how quickly good people can become villains when they believe they are doing things for someone or something they love. That's basically the plot of Breaking Bad, a good person driven by good motivations becoming a villain. When people care deeply, they lose perspective. That means that the person you elected because of how much they care finds it a lot easier to justify the villainous behavior since they're doing it for the right reasons. In this way, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. Let's back up a little and see if we can't make this a little more concrete. We start at the beginning of the political process. A bunch of people who care enough about something to show up at a meeting organized for whatever cause they're supporting today. The first order of business, as always, is to pick a leader. Who volunteers? Nobody, because nobody wants extra work for a cause they don't care about. But we granted that everyone in the room cares at least a little, so every individual in the room makes a choice. And the choice is essentially weighing a number of factors, such as how little they want the extra work or the headaches, how much they care about the cause, and how much they think they're competent to help. Once again, those presenting themselves for leadership roles are a self-selected group. Let's take a look at the traits that are being selected for at this juncture. It turns out lunatics kind of self-select for leadership. Theoretically, you'd want the most motivated, competent individual to take the lead, right? Unfortunately, there's no real objective measurements to find out who is the most motivated and competent, so we have to rely on each individual's assessment of their own capabilities. And even if you're not familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, you can guess how that goes. Think about what makes somebody decide to seek out a leadership position. First off, they're already saying that they kind of think they're better than you. They're basically stating it by saying that they're more qualified than everyone else in the room. The ball's on this guy, huh? It takes an ego to think that you should be in charge, and sometimes that self-image might not be entirely consistent with reality, and maybe the individual is inflating their own abilities, at least in their own mind, if not also in how they present themselves to others. Second, people seeking leadership are demonstrating that they want power. Why? People who actively seek power should always be treated with a large degree of suspicion. There's a reason sayings like lust for power and drunk with power exist. Granted, there are many good reasons for seeking power. In fact, I advocate that well-intentioned, civic-minded people do just that. However, certain personalities, especially those that we've already established consider themselves above the rest in at least some capacity, seek power for power's sake. For these reasons, those seeking leadership positions tend to self-select for people who are narcissists or others who are likely to abuse such power. A lot of times, that's why they're seeking the power in the first place. The other driving factor for going after leadership positions is motivation. That is, people seeking the leadership positions have a greater motivation to ensure the common good or the success of the group or cause than everyone else. Here the question is less as to why they are so motivated as to how this motivation interacts with other underlying personality traits. There's a reason why sports cheering sections are often referred to as crazies, such as the Camden Crazies of Duke. Caring about something deeply, whether it's a nation, person, or a sports team, is inherently irrational and can quickly spiral out of control. There's a reason we say that love drives you crazy. Even when motivated by the best of intentions, love, or passion for a cause, can lead to some crazy behavior. When we vote for people because they demonstrate more emotional commitment to our shared cause than anyone else, we are almost, by definition, empowering the craziest people on our side. In other words, the same passion that drives these leaders to fight harder for their people also clouds their judgment and thus their ability to fight in a strategic manner. Here's how this might work in practice. That passion for your side convinces you that you must be right. Maybe at first you were a little more reasonable, seeing both sides, but once you've picked a team, the psychology of group dynamics takes over and your passion for your team runs the show. People in the legal field will know this as trial psychosis. Every 4 years, partisans on each side experience electoral psychosis, and sports fans know the guy who, again, thinks every year his team is going to win the championship. Our passion often makes us blind, and this applies to the people who lead the causes. This can make it difficult to accurately evaluate things like the likelihood of success. People become overconfident. The efficacy of their messaging, and ultimately what means are justified in pursuit of their cause. It should also be noted that as leaders of their cause, their interests are now intertwined, creating greater incentives for them. But this episode isn't about incentives. Empowering the most passionate also means handing the reins of power to those willing to go the furthest. It shouldn't be surprising that the most passionate are also the most willing to bend the rules, lying, and using violence to get their way. After all, they're the ones who care the most. Sometimes that's exactly what's intended. After all, you're trying to elect somebody who's going to win. However, very few people or organizations are win at any cost. For example, political parties. Republicans want a Republican who will play to win, and Democrats want a Democrat who will play to win, and vice versa. But neither side should want somebody who's going to win at the cost of destroying or harming the nation as a whole. However, the more passionate will cut things a lot closer and are willing to cause a lot more collateral damage to the nation in pursuit of their cause. In this sense, we are all right with empowering villains as long as their villainy is in our name. Finally, when electing a leader, we want somebody who's going to fight for us. Who exactly us is varies from time to time, place to place, and context to context, but there's almost always a them to protect us against. Fighting for their people with a passion is the definition of a good leader, defining historical figures such as Churchill, Leonidas, and Spartacus. However, the same passion is also what creates some of history's greatest villains. Hitler loved Germany. This passion for the German people ended with their misery and destruction. When we elect leaders based on the amount of passion they show for their cause, we are electing the craziest among us. Their passion makes them heroes to their followers. However, it's also what makes them villains. Now, the point of all this isn't to villainize passion, emotion, or people who are passionate or emotional about a cause. All of those things can be great when applied correctly. The difficulty lies in emotional discipline. The ability to allow the love for your people to drive you without letting it cloud your thinking or activate your animalistic instincts. In other words, you need fiery hearts inflamed with the passion of patriotism, but cool enough heads to pursue the common good rationally and strategically. Thank you for joining us on the Rational Nationalist. I've been your host, Lee Ellis, signing off.